Hello and welcome to another Sunday masterclass. Now, I don't usually appear on camera in these, but I thought I'd just pop in and tell you what today's masterclass is about. Lots of you have seen the cabinet where I keep my paints and all the little pots that I keep my paints in and how I sort of categorize everything. So today what I'm going to do is show you the exact color categories that I store my paints in. Also talk about why I store my paints this way. Now, as a sort of a disclaimer, you may find that you have a lot less paint colors than me. It's not because I'm a millionaire. I wish that YouTube was making me rich, but it isn't. It's simply because I have 30 years of teaching real classes, so I needed a lot of paints for that. And also I've worked with a couple of paint manufacturers to develop colors, so I get sent free samples. And if you do something as a job, if anybody's ever giving away stuff, then it tends to land on your doorstep. So if you have a lot less colors than me, I'll simplify this system so that you know how to easily store your paints and colors. So let's jump right in and get started. So before we go through my exact color categories, let's talk about why I nearly always store by color. So whether that's paints like this, and these are the little boxes we'll be looking at today, or it's swatches in a book, or it's paint palettes here like these ones where I've put my colors out, I nearly always categorize by color. You can see I've got blues and purples here. This one has neutral colors, and back to this one which has some lilacs in. We'll go through these, as I said, in a moment. But if you're looking for a lilac colour, then it's not much use to you if all your paints are stored by manufacturer or all your swatches are in manufacturer, because you need to look at the difference between your Daniel Smith colour and your Winsor & Newton colour, and if they're in different places, it really isn't a lot of help to you. Now, there are times when I do store by manufacturer. For example, this is my current entire set of Inktense pencils. You might have seen my recent video where I swatched these. I'm talking about getting more so I can do some Inktense videos for you. But different types of pencil like this often have different properties, and so it might be, even within things like coloured pencils, you might want to store them by manufacturer. But even within that, I would store, if I had these in one of those little holders, for example, I'd have the yellows together and the browns together and things like that. So you still want to store and swatch within manufacturers by colour, because this is just going to assist you in choosing the right colour to get. So let's go through my storage system for my watercolour paints now, and I'll talk about how I categorise them. We'll go through each individual colour, and I'll also talk about how to simplify it if you don't have as many paints as me. So beginning with primaries, let's start with my blues. So I've got this box here. This is my cool blues. And in here I have things like cerulean, I have all my phthalo blues, I have my turquoises, I've got some Daniel Smith manganese blues. So these are all the blues that tend towards the green end of the spectrum. If you don't understand the difference between warm and cool colours, or how we categorise those in art, which is not always the same as things like fashion, I'll leave a video in the description of this one so that you can figure out how to do that and it won't be a mystery to you anymore. But this is basically all the blues that tend towards the turquoise end of the spectrum. Next up, I've got warm blues. So these would include mostly cobalt blues and different versions of ultramarine. So these are the blues that tend towards the purple red end of the spectrum. Now, eventually, even after categorising warm and cool blues, I ran out of space, and so I further broke them down. And this one I like to call dark blues. Now, you'll notice that there's Payne's Grey in here. Now, Payne's Grey is mostly blue pigment in most brands. In fact, grey is mostly blue pigment, and this behaves much like a blue. So I actually put my Payne's Grey in with my blues. And here's the sort of the dilemma. How do we categorise things? Let's talk about yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is an earth colour, but it's also a yellow. So when it comes to these colours that could be one or could be another, it's really up to you. We all see colour differently. There's no wrong or right answer. Put them where you think is most useful. And to me, it's most useful to have my Payne's Grey in with my dark blues. So what else is in dark blue? I've got some Prussian in here. I've got some indigo and some other mixed blues that go into that sort of dark and fairly neutral coloured blue. So let's talk about reds and pinks next. I've probably categorised the reds and pinks into more subcategories than any of my other colours, simply because I seem to have so many. So if you're starting out, you might have one tub that has all your reds and pinks in, and that's fine. And that's how I started, but then I found that was too many. So I divided into reds and pinks, and then I further divided. So let me show you the way that I categorize these colors. So this is mostly my what I would call true pinks. So I've got my permanent roses in here. I've got some quinacridone rose. I've got some opera pink. So these are all the sort of fairly standard bright pinks. Because I ran out of space, I then went down to muted pinks. So what have I got in here? I've got some Potter's pinks. Those are very muted, neutral pinks. I've got some genuine rose madder, which is almost a brownish pink. And I've got this colour here, this dusty rose. This is a Jackman's colour. I think it might be from their granulating range. Anyway, when I swatched it, it's quite a muted pink. So that enabled me to pop these in another box because I was in danger of not being able to get the lid on. Now between red and pink we have crimson, and so these are colours that when diluted they are pinks, but they're much more sort of neutral soft pinks than those bright pinks we looked at the beginning, but they're not as muted as things like Potter's pink. So what colours do I have here? I have some alizarin crimson, I have some mixed colours, I have some perylene maroon, I have this one here that I can't even pronounce, anthraquinone red. That was a sample I've been sent. I've got some sample of my hollyhocks colour from my floral painting set. I've got some permanent madder lake, which is a very similar colour to alizarin crimson. So here I've got all those crimson dark reds that dilute to soft rose pinks. Believe it or not, I still have two categories of red to go. So here I've got my, what you would consider to be red, my true bright reds. I've got some pyrrole red. I've got this poppy red, which is a colour from my floral painting set again. I've got some cadmium red deep, and somewhere in here I'm quite certain that I have some cadmium red light. I've also got some scarlet lake, and for some reason a small pan paint as well. So basically anything that's a bright or true red, a blood red, a poppy red, that's going to be in this box here. So you might be wondering, what on earth is beyond that? How many more reds could there be? Well, there's the Oxide Reds. Now, you'll notice there's a lot of handwritten samples here, and these are samples sent to me by the manufacturer, Jackman's, that I work with, and these were different grind sizes of the same pigment. Absolutely fascinating. See how the colour differs, because it's not only the pigment that determines the colour. I've spoken more about that in other videos. So what I've got in here, I've got my light oxide red, I've got Venetian red, I may even have something called English red, but here's the deal, most of these are the same pigment because the oxide reds come in a much larger range than many of the other pigments. They range from anything from a light brick red, and often in ranges this colour is actually called light red, so they'll range from light brick through to the Venetian reds, which tend to be the ones that have got a little bit more sort of brownish burgundy in them. So the oxide reds are fabulous colours for painting things like brickwork and roof tiles. Let's look at our last primary, which is yellow. So this is my cool yellows. So in here I've got some light cadmium yellows, I've got lemon yellows. This one here is a primrose yellow from the SAA. It's actually a nickel titanate. So sometimes manufacturers give colours their own name. This is Buttercup from my painting set. I've got a Hansa yellow here. That's a very similar colour to lemon yellow. And I've got a Naples yellow light. So you can see these bright, cool yellows. And if I'm ever not sure where to categorise something, I just swatch it and see how I think it looks. Oh, and before you ask where I get these containers, I have friends that eat a lot of takeaways. They're just Chinese and Indian takeaway containers. So this is my warm yellows. So what have I got in here? Now I seem to have yellow ochre in here. I'm not sure if that should be in a different category. I'm not perfect at putting these away. I've got Naples yellow. So you see here, I'm going into these warmer yellows. I've got cadmium yellow deep. So I've got those transparent yellowy, orangey yellow colours. I think this is some Indian yellow, and I've got some Winsor & Newton transparent yellow. Again, that's a very similar colour to Indian yellow. So I've got the colours that go into warm yellow or orangey yellows. And here I have another Naples yellow. So next I have something that's sort of between a primary and a secondary. So these are my ochres and my golds. So I told you that other colour was in the wrong box. So I've got my yellow ochre here. Let's put that in the right box. So in here I've got ochres. I've got some raw sienna. It looks brown there, but it actually dilutes to a very golden yellow. I've got some Terry Harrison autumn gold. That's a mixed colour. made by the artist Terry Harrison before he passed. I've got an autumn foliage colour, which is part of my shadow set. I believe that could be a sample there. Now I've got a pearlescent gold here, and we'll talk more about sparkly colours later. Again, that's one I'm not sure is in the correct box. But then I do have another gold shimmer in here as well, so maybe it is. And most of all, which would be indicative of this whole box, I think I have a quinacridone gold. So these are all colours that are kind of golden, and I would consider them almost between three categories. So they're kind of yellows, but they're kind of earths, and they're also kind of gold. So let's move on to secondary colours, and because I have that box of golds, I only have one box to put my oranges in, because you can see that's all I need. So I've got what I would call cool oranges here, some that I made myself, this marigold colour, and I've got this permanent orange here. You can see that's what we would call a cool orange, although all orange is technically warm, but this is the cooler end of the spectrum. But I've also got colours that go to the warmer end of the spectrum, sort of the sunset oranges, the oranges that tend a little bit towards pink. Now, if I had a ton of orange paints, I could certainly separate these into two more categories of warm and cool. But the truth is, I really don't need to, because there's only so many boxes I can fit in my house, and all of these oranges fit nicely in this box here. So my purples I have categorized in two boxes, and this is the darker ones. So what I've got in here, this color is permanent blue violet. So that's a really strong purple. It doesn't look like it from the color on the outside, but you can't tell from that. This is a color, it's a bit messed up on the lid, isn't it? This is a color that I invented for my floral set. So it's a mixed color. This is delphinium. So it's almost like an ultramarine, but more purple. I've got a colour here I was sent called ultramarine violet. I've got some stormy purples as well. So this one's storm clouds. That's from my shadow set. I also have a very lovely perylene violet here. So some of these, this is a warmer violet, but they're very strong and dark, and that's how I've categorized them. And again, this is another perylene violet. So although this one is warm and this one would be cooler, they're all in the same box because they're my strong purples, and I've named this box violets. So the other category I have is mauves and lilacs. So these are just softer versions of purple. I've got a lavender in here. It's a mixed colour. I've got a Jackman's Moonlight. Again, with these mixed colours, I will have swatched them to decide how strong they are. I've got Summer Clouds from my shadow set, which is somewhere between a grey and a soft purple. Good for cloud shadows, as its name suggests. I've also got Cobalt Violets here, and I think you can see just by the little bit around the edge there, it's a real strong lilac colour. I've also got in here Petal Shadow. This is my best-selling paint colour, actually. I'll leave links below if you're interested in those. And this one is a very, very muted colour that's between a grey and a lilac, and I invented it for making shadows on white petals. It's also good for clouds. And I've also got a quinacridone violet here. So these are my lighter, softer versions of purple. Before we talk about neutrals, let's quickly go on to the greens. I have my greens in two boxes as well. So this is the fresher, lighter greens. So I've labelled this box light green. I've got some beautiful fresh colours here. This is a fresh green from my floral set. I've got some sap green and another version of sap green here by Talon's Rembrandt. I've got green gold here. Now, some of these could almost go into the gold section, but they are, to my mind, more green than they are gold. So I put these in with my light greens. I've got a soft green here, which is another colour that I came up with for my floral set. And a spring green here, which is a Jackman's mixed colour. In my second box of greens, I've got my darker colours. So I've got a mixed colour here, Forest Shadow. That's another popular colour from my range. It's a very strong, warm green. But I've also got cool greens in here. I've got phthalo greens, quite a lot of phthalo greens actually. Very good colour for mixing. I've got some chrome oxide green. And here I've got a Jackman's colour called Jade Green. Again, I think this is probably from their granulating set. Colour from my floral set called Darkest Green. Here I have a true Viridian green. So phthalo greens, in cheaper sets, phthalo greens are often labelled as Viridian green, but most of them don't actually contain true Viridian pigments. So this is my dark greens box. I've got 5 boxes left, mostly neutrals. So this is my warm brown. So I have some burnt sienna in here. I've got burnt umber, a mixed colour called autumn foliage, and another burnt umber from White Nights by St. Petersburg Paints. In this box, I have cool browns. I have them all the way from the very light and weak raw umber colour through to some mixed colours like this wet sand colour that I designed, going through to much darker colours like this sepia by Talon's Rembrandt. And I've got a colour here from Jackman's called Twilight. I also have a Mars brown in here and a winter bark from my own shadow set. So these are all of my cool browns, some weak and some strong. Next up, I have my greys and blacks. So I've got some carbon black in here, some other types of black. I've got Davies grey. I've got some neutral tint. Again, neutral tint could go into the cool browns. It kind of depends on the manufacturer and how it looks. I've got some Perylene black green shade. This is a fabulous colour. It's very green actually. Again, I could put it in my dark greens. I've got some graphite grey. I've got some hematite genuine. Now this looks brown on here, but I imagine that when I swatched it, it came out very grey. So this one contains all my greys and blacks. This box is labelled whites and buff. So I have some Chinese white in here and I have some titanium white. For some reason I've got a black in there, obviously in the wrong box. So Chinese white is often a mix of zinc white, which is a more transparent and weaker white, and a titanium white. Some Chinese whites are just a zinc white. You'd have to look on the back at the pigments. My favourite is a titanium white because if you're going to use white, you might as well have a strong opaque one. And then I've got, I need to order some more of this. Obviously, I've got a little bit of buff titanium, which is a very pale colour, traditionally an oil painting colour, but we do now have them in a couple of ranges of watercolours. And by its very nature, it is quite whitish and quite opaque because you simply can't do a pale watercolour that you put in a tube. You can't just have it full of water without having a lot of opaque pigment. So what's in my very last box, you can see there's lots of different colours in this one. This is all my paints that have shimmer and sparkle in. Obviously you notice there was a couple in the golds, whether I put them there on purpose or not, I can't recall. But these are all the ones that have some shimmer in. A lot of these are Jackman's paints, but I've also got a couple of Daniel Smith colours here. I've got some Moonstone and Iridescent Gold Tone. Now the reason I've popped these in their own separate box is they're very pretty, but it's quite annoying if you accidentally pick up a shimmer paint when you weren't intending on using one. They don't layer well. They're sort of a decorative thing that you would probably put on last. So I don't want to pop them in with my yellows and my purples and end up, you know, picking them up accidentally thinking that I was using a colour without shimmer. If I use these, I want it to be quite intentional. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn a lot more about watercolour painting and watercolour paints, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's completely free.